Good evening, folks. Welcome back to Migweek 2021. We are in the final stretch, sad to say. We still have a couple of days left. It's been going fantastically so far. It's had another good day today. We have a brilliant guest this evening. Dawn Balmer will be joining us in a second. Bear with me, Dawn, while I just take care of some boring stuff first. Yeah, today was also really good and not as consequential when it came to big numbers of migrants, but there was still quite a lot happening. There was quite a lot of siskins arriving today, still more red wings, bramblings, goldcrests, things like that. There's a nice sprinkling of yellow-browed warblers around, a few bits and pieces moving on the sea, which may be the theme for tomorrow, with a bit of a northerly overnight and a northerly in the morning. That could encourage a few seabirds to move. So another good day. Thanks to everybody on the ground. Called in to see the Flamborough ringing team, who were in great form. And the walks went really well, so I hear today as well. Tomorrow, just to quickly mention, there are walks at Flamborough again. The ringing team are operational at Flamborough, not at Filey tomorrow due to the winds and the ringing site. Obviously put the birds first, etc. So the Filey team are taking a break tomorrow morning, but Flamborough operational as usual. And tomorrow evening we have a fantastic talk from Poppy Rummery at Bempton, talking about a year at Bempton Cliffs. So all goes well. We do hope you're enjoying the programme. We've had a really fantastic array of talks thus far. I'm really excited about this evening's talk as well. What I would say is, if you enjoy anything we're doing, I know you've heard this before, but I'll say it anyway. If you enjoy what we're doing, or you enjoy what we're going to do in the next few days, or you just think it's a good idea, everything's free and open to everybody. So we'd really appreciate it if you donate to our chosen charity this year, which is St. Catherine's Hospice, an absolutely wonderful local hospice. And you can donate to that by going to justgiving.com/Migweek21. That's justgiving.com/Migweek21. And we'd really appreciate it. And we appreciate everybody who's already donated. There's lots and lots going on there right now. That's really good stuff. Right, so this evening, really chuffed to have Dawn Balmer speaking for us. It's every year at Migweek, since its kind of inception 6 years ago, we've had a kind of a talk which fits a certain bill, and that bill is the Martin Garner inspirational talk, as we call it. And it's a talk that really kind of inspires and educates us about migration, which of course was Martin's great love. For those of you who didn't know Martin, he was an absolute legend who inspired many of us in many different ways. His positive energy still very much surrounds us up here on the coast and elsewhere, and we miss him very much, and we hope we're kind of honouring him by continuing these inspirational talks every year. And I think it's fair to say that he would very much enjoy them as well. So yeah, the perfect person to fill that role this year, I think, is Dawn. Dawn Balmer is, many of you will know Dawn from her work, from a vast array of work. It seems like half the papers I read and half the books on my shelf have Dawn's name on it. I was fortunate to get to know Dawn pretty well a few years ago when we were in the same team for Champions of the Flyway. We had a great time then, and happy to call her a friend since. And Dawn has fulfilled many roles in British and international ornithology. She is presently on the BBRC, the British Birds Rarities Committee, the first overdue female member of that committee. We can no longer call it 10 rare men, thankfully. She's head of surveys at the BTO, and she was formerly on the BOURC, the British Ornithologists Union Records Committee. So yeah, she sort of knows what she's talking about. to understate gravely. Tonight, Dawn will be talking about the state of basically our migrant birds. I'm not going to steal any of the thunder, apart from to say that it's going to be really fascinating, and we're very chuffed to have you here, Dawn. Over to you, Dawn Balmer. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mark. And can you see my presentation okay?
Perfect.
Cool, good. So yeah, thanks. It's a great pleasure to speak to you this evening, especially this Martin Garner talk. Martin was a good friend of mine. Yeah, really inspirational. And you're right. He would be really pleased to have been listening to this talk this evening. So yeah, we'll have a wee dram later for Martin, I think. So yeah, tonight I'm going to talk about unraveling the mysteries of migration. So there we go. So I'm a licensed bird ringer, but I feel a bit fraudulent this evening actually giving this talk because although I help out with some sort of local projects involved in bird ringing and learning more about migration, this is very much the work of many of my colleagues and volunteers across the UK. So I'm going to talk about the ways that we've been using modern technology to help us understand more about the migration routes of birds. I'm going to start off by talking about cuckoo. This is probably the BTO's sort of most well-known tracking project. And we became interested in cuckoo, especially because, as you know, it's a sort of, I'd say, common and widespread. It's a very widespread species across Britain and Ireland. But the work we did for the Bird Atlas 2007 to 11 project showed that although it's common and widespread, there'd actually been widespread changes in the abundance of cuckoos. So on this map on the right, the blue colour shows these are 20 by 20 kilometre squares, actually declining relative abundance of a cuckoo over the previous 20 years. And the red areas show actually where it's been increasing. And this pattern is actually common to many migrant birds. So cuckoo, spotted flycatcher, willow warbler, swallow. This pattern of declines in the south and east, but faring better in the north and west. So yeah, we wanted to help understand what might be driving this pattern of declines in cuckoo. And the timing was just right that technology was moving on, and cuckoo was actually a perfect species. It was a good species size-wise to be able to take tags, and it's a nocturnal migrant. And we knew very little at the time about its migration. So you'll be familiar with bird ringing. You'll have seen it hopefully during Migweek this week. So it involves putting metal rings on birds with a unique number. And you hope one day that somebody else might retrap one of your birds, or perhaps unfortunately the bird is found dead, and we call these recoveries. So we didn't know much based on ringing recoveries where cuckoos may go for the winter. But there was one recovery of a bird that was ringed in Berkshire in 23rd of June 1928 as a chick in a pied wagtail's nest, and it was recovered in Cameroon on the 30th of January 1930. And there's also been a couple of other recoveries in Africa, in Algeria, Tunisia and Cameroon. And that was the extent of our knowledge of where cuckoos might go. So new technology came in, this 5-gram transmitter using satellite technology, accurate to around 500 meters. And the really key thing here was its size. And we have this really strict rule when you're applying this technology to birds, that it needs to be under 5% of a bird's body weight. So we were able to use this on cuckoos. And the way it works is the battery, you can see it fitted to the back of a cuckoo here, that it's charged by solar power, by the sun, and it's on for 10 hours and off for 48 hours. And it's a really fantastic way of getting information pretty much in real time about the cuckoo's life cycle throughout the whole year. So first of all, you have to catch your cuckoo, and that's often easier said than done. So using a decoy and perhaps playing the tape of a male cuckoo calling. And if you're lucky, you'll catch your cuckoo and be able to ring it with a metal ring, as I described, the unique number. And then the process of fitting the tag. Obviously, these are very highly trained bird ringers who have a special license to fit these kind of tags. And then your cuckoo is ready to go, and it will transmit live data. So at the start of this project, we decided to actually focus the tagging in areas where the cuckoo was not doing so well, particularly in the sort of southeast of Britain, but also in parts of the range where it was faring better, so up in Scotland. So we started this work in 2011, and so we call this a class of 2011. These were really important birds that showed us gave so much information just in that first year. And I think it's really fascinating that you always look forward to cuckoos arriving in the spring and being that sort of sign of summer, but actually they leave so early. The birds here leaving as early as 3rd of June, 12th of June, 16th of June. So one of our birds here, Chris, actually, we worked out, spends 40% of his time in Africa, 38% of his time on migration, and actually only 15% of the whole year in Britain. So what we really learnt in this first year is that when the birds leave Britain, they were taking two very distinct routes out of Britain. One southeast through Italy, then crossing the Sahara and ending up in a wintering area around the Congo, and the other route through France and Spain, then into West Africa. And as you see, they actually ended up in virtually the same location despite taking these two very different routes. And where they headed to in Africa was around the Teki Plateau, which looks a bit like Yorkshire, perhaps, you could imagine. But this is the habitat that they were spending some time in. And before making some movements around to the swamp forest, which look a bit like this. And then in the spring, they all made this movement westwards into West Africa. And we found that actually, this stopover time in West Africa was really important. And on average, they were staying here for around 13 and a half days. So they all returned, despite going out in different directions, they all returned via West Africa. So we're talking about stopover and how important these stopover sites are and what makes it a successful desert crossing or perhaps an unsuccessful one. Well, by tagging more birds over the next couple of years, we started to get this picture that these two different routes were being followed by birds from different parts of the country. And what we were finding in these early days was actually real difference in the mortality rate. So the birds that were migrating via the southwest route through France and Spain had a 41% mortality. And the birds traveling via the southeast had a 5% mortality. And we were able to work out that actually the birds traveling through the southeast route were mainly coming from the north and west of Britain, where, if you think back to that atlas map, the population was faring better. And the birds moving southwestwards were actually mainly coming from southern UK. So this was published in a scientific paper. But since then, we've been tagging more birds to try and get a better understanding if this holds true over a number of years. So as well as these long distance, telling us about where the birds go in the winter, we're also learning much more about some movements within the breeding season. So I thought I'd share with you what I think is quite an extraordinary movement of a bird tagged up near Troon in June, which moved down to an area near Gretna for a few days in late June, early July, then across to Harewood Forest a day later, and then actually back to Troon. So, when you see your cuckoo perhaps on your patch, and it's if you're fortunate enough to have local cuckoos, you might think it's the same cuckoo and it's it arrives and it stays there all the time. But actually, it's quite amazing to understand that actually cuckoos even within the UK could actually be quite mobile. So yeah, I think it's a sort of really fascinating bit of information that's coming from these tag birds. And of course, it's not just us tagging cuckoos, across Europe. there's been a lot of interest in cuckoos. So these are just some of the tracks from collaborative projects across Europe. And you'll see that obviously wherever they come from, they cross the Sahara on a very broad front and are largely going down to the Congo area and some a little bit further south and east into Africa. So there's lots of remarkable birds, and we've still got a number of birds alive as we speak. This is a sort of bird that's it was ringed in Suffolk, actually quite close to the nunnery here in Thetford, and back in 2016. So it's quite a remarkable bird that's journeyed to and from Britain down to Africa and back, and is, as I say, still going strong. So I had a look where he is. This is from yesterday, actually. So he's currently in Nigeria. And if you have a look at these tracks, you can see he's utilising sort of area of forest. Just at the sort of the northern end of that map, there's obviously a favoured bit of forest it's toing and froing from. So you can see, you can go to the BTO website and have a look at the cuckoo tracking and pick a bird and have a look where it is right now. There you go. I don't know what happened there, but it popped up a bit bigger. So yeah, really amazing project. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about the nightjars in Thetford Forest. So this is a project that I have been helping out with for about 10 years, actually. It's part of a Thetford Forest Ringing Group project. And based here in Thetford, we're right in the heart of Thetford Forest, so it's great to be able to study a species on our doorstep. And this is a real collaborative effort. It's pretty hard work finding nightjars and trying to catch them. So yeah, we go out in groups and spend a lot of time observing where the nightjars are, putting up mist nets in sort of the favoured areas, and spend quite a lot of time finding nests so we can really target our efforts into catching birds. And if we find a nest, we monitor the nest throughout the season and ring the chicks. And you can just about make the chicks out there. They're really, really, really very young, just a couple of days old, pretty cute, aren't they? And then we hopefully catch the birds and fit a tag to them. So we've been fitting, well, it's the same tag, but applied in two different ways to get different kinds of information. So you can see on this picture here that there's a tag mounted at the top of the tail. And so this is applied to the central tail feathers. And the idea with this tag is that it gives us precise information over a short time period of how the birds are using Thetford Forest. And if we don't manage to recapture birds, it will simply drop off next time those central tail feathers are molted when it's on its wintering grounds. So yeah, that is dental floss. You can see on the left-hand side, it's just glued and tied, and it's very, very secure there. And you can see on the right, it just fits at the top of the tail. And yeah, this allows us to really give really precise information of how the bird's using the forest. And the map here shows us the movements of two females tracked over 4 nights. And it's actually giving us a location of a bird every 5 minutes. And what's quite fascinating here is that the birds are, although obviously they're nesting in the forest, you can see the base of that home range at the top end of those lines, but it's moving out into the wider countryside. In fact, that surrounds Lakenheath Warren. It's obviously plentiful moths out on the heath, and it's making those foraging trips out of the forest into more sort of open landscape for feeding. And this is a track of a single male. I find this pretty fascinating from a survey organizer point of view. It looks like it could actually be 3 different males if you went bird watching and listening to chirring. That it's actually chirring in 3 different locations over just sort of consecutive evenings. So yeah, really quite mobile within the forest. And we've been helping out with a project up at Dersingham Bog, which is just north of King's Lynn in Norfolk. And again, this is quite an extensive heathland site, but again, they found birds leaving what looks a fantastic habitat for plentiful food, but that's also been leaving and foraging in the wider countryside, often in farmland and down lanes. So in terms of actually where nightjars go for the winter, we have some information from ringing recoveries as far as sort of North Africa. But we wanted to use these geolocators to give us some information about where the birds go in the winter. So we fitted some geolocators in 2011. And the real difficulty with these birds is, unlike the cuckoo, which is a satellite tag and is transmitting live, in order to get the data back from these birds, you have to recatch the bird. So you're always looking for birds which are quite territorial and are likely to return to the same area the next year. So you've got a good chance of catching them again. And these geolocators record light levels against time, which we can then process that data to give us latitude and longitude. So there's lots of variables which might make it difficult to give a very precise location, but we certainly get good enough information to tell us about sort of key stopover sites and main wintering areas, even if we're not able to perhaps map really precisely. So this is back in 2011, and this gave us some information that the birds left. This is also part of a collaborative project across Europe. They sort of leave Northern Europe in August and have a prolonged stopover in North Africa, and then cross the Sahara on the broad front, and generally wintering in the democratic region of Congo. And in the spring, they start their return in late February with a rapid crossing of the rainforest. And you can see again, they make that westerly movement, stopover in the Ivory Coast and reaching the breeding areas in early May. And in a few years later, 2015 and 17, we used a different kind of tag, a very GPS global positioning tag, which is a high precision, and we were able to retrieve 9 of these. And that confirmed that the main wintering area is really within the Democratic Republic of Congo. So technology has improved just over those few short years to give us much more precise information about where the birds are going. So that's nightjars. It's still ongoing, and this year we've actually deployed some more tags for the winter. So we'll be busy next summer trying to recatch those birds and see what they've been up to. So moving on to swifts, this is a project which operated in Cambridgeshire in summer 2010. The birds were in an area that they could easily be accessed when they were breeding. So again, it's that importance of being able to try and recatch a bird back in the same place the following summer. And as I say, the tags were retrieved the following year. So they were tagged in Falmere. This is in July, and you can have a look at, if you can see the purple arrow. Again, they moved southwestwards into France and Spain, into West Africa, and then again moving to sort of the Democratic Republic of Congo area. Actually, it's only late summer by this stage. It's into August by the time they've reached that. So yeah, we're still in the midsummer in the UK, and our swifts are already well down in Africa. And it's interesting that this bird actually made a midwinter movement eastwards towards Mozambique and spent the main midwinter period there before moving back to sort of Congo, and then making a movement back in the spring around April time into West Africa, and rapidly crossing then and making its way back to the UK. And another bird, very similar pattern, but didn't go quite as far as Mozambique, the east coast of Africa on this occasion, but still made a shorter midwinter movement. And again, it really demonstrated that West Africa is, such an important stopover for many of our migrant birds. And this time the swift staying for around 15 days to fuel up before making that, really hazardous journey back northwards. So as well as providing this information on those long distance movements, a bit like the nightjar, we can also use these tags to give us information within the breeding season about, favoured breeding areas and sort of foraging flights. So we did some work near Great Yarmouth on the east coast of Norfolk. And again, we could use this technique to show us how far the birds were foraging when the chicks were small. So this is about sort of 5 or 6 kilometre movements from the nest site on foraging trips, sort of moving westwards out of Great Yarmouth into the surrounding countryside. But when the chicks were bigger, actually, we can see that they started to make, even bigger movements out to the west of Norwich. And one bird even made a movement to Thetford, which is it's about 40 miles away. So, I think it's really, fascinating again that, you're expecting the swifts you see around town to be around town most of the time and just, collecting food in the sky above us. But actually, they're making really quite extensive movements during the breeding season. And I was pretty amazed to see this movement to near the nunnery, in fact. So I think the use of tags can give us lots of information about these local movements, and particularly with respect to the nightjar. It can really inform us about the preferred habitat for nesting and foraging within the forest, which can help us, inform local management working with the Forestry Commission in that case. But here it's giving us some indication of where the birds are moving around. And we can focus on particular hotspots for feeding. And we were able to check this site out, and it proved to be an oilseed rape field, which has obviously had an abundance of food for the swifts, and they were repeatedly visiting this site. So people have been working on swifts in other countries as well. And actually, this isn't for swift, I don't think at all. I'm going to skip that one because I think it's out of place. But there we go. And just moving on to nightingale. This is another project that we've been doing sort of locally in East Anglia, around Methold Hive out in the Fens in Norfolk, and Grafham Water in Cambridgeshire, but also Alston Forest in Kent. And again, this is using those geolocated tags. So again, the need to retrap the birds in subsequent years. And in fact, nightingales are really quite site faithful. And in this case, we were able to retrieve 13 of the 20 tags that were deployed. So it's a really high success rate, actually, in getting the tags back and being able to download the information. And what it showed us, this is one of the birds from Grafham Water. It was tagged in the middle of May at Grafham Water. And when it started its migration, it stopped over in southern Portugal for a few days before crossing the Sahara. And the interesting thing here is that it spent the early part of a winter in western Senegambia and then moved slightly south and east to Sierra Leone before making a long crossing back across the Sahara and stopping off in Spain on the way back. And it returned to Grafham Water the next year on the 19th of April. And this is just a little story about 5 of the nightingales from the site in Kent, which all went to West Africa. And so I think it's really amazing if you look at the dates that they arrive on the wintering grounds, really quite close together, actually, and some in mid-September and early October. And actually, again, if you look at that departure date, so it's really fascinating to know what sort of triggers that departure from the UK and then departure from West Africa to go back north, just all leaving in just a matter of a few days apart. And arriving back in the UK, again, literally sort of 3 days difference between them. And if we have a look at one of these birds, 098, we can see that it departed Gambia on the 17th of March. And just 3 days later, it was in northwest Spain, and it had a good stopover there for 22 days before arriving in Kent the next day. So really remarkable distances being travelled here, 3 days covering over 3,000 kilometres, and here just 1 day's travel over 1,000 kilometres. So yeah, remarkable stories coming out of tracking nightingales. Just briefly, I love gulls, so any talk has to include gulls for me. This is a little bit about lesser blackback gulls, some tagging work done in Orford nests in Suffolk. And we might think a lot of our gulls, large gulls, sort of hang around over the winter, but actually our lesser blackback gulls can make really long movements down into Portugal, Spain, and can winter in North Africa. So this is one particular bird, sort of bird 395, and it shows movements over 3 different winters. And you can see that it crosses, goes out of the UK and crossing Biscay, then hugging the coast of Portugal before crossing down around sort of Gibraltar into North Africa, into Morocco. And I rather like this one actually, because it's a pair of lesser blackback gulls tagged at Orford nests in June 2010. And the male indeed wintered in Dorset, Hampshire, and Wiltshire, no doubt sort of checking out a few landfill sites or pig fields, but the female had better ideas and went to Lisbon for the winter. But they returned back to Orford nests and they continued to be a pair. So, that pair bond didn't extend to overwintering sites. And also, just keeping the theme of long distance movements, but also informing us about shorter movements as well. This is 4 adult birds that were tagged on Walney Island. And these are just showing tracks over 3 days that, despite all nesting on Walney Island, they're actually foraging in really different areas, making use of landfill sites, but 2 of them actually heading out to sea, spending quite a lot of time there. And this is an area of work that BTO has been particularly interested in relation to offshore wind farms, looking at how birds behave as they fly to and from breeding and foraging areas, potentially through wind farms. So yeah, lots of information for sort of management and mitigation, as well as learning about those long distance movements. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the BTO short-eared owl work now. This is perhaps my favourite tracking project that BTO's been undertaking. I think as a birder, hopefully perhaps this week you might have even seen a short-eared owl coming in off the sea. It's an amazing sight when you sat there and you pick up an owl heading towards you, and you either identify it as a short-eared owl or maybe a long-eared owl, but yeah, you often wonder where it's been, where it's going to, and just what amazing journey it might have had. So my colleagues up in Scotland have been very interested in short-eared owls. And it's a species that's very poorly surveyed by traditional techniques, and quite hard to detect on the breeding grounds. They're thinly spread as a breeding species. And our bird atlas back in 2007 to 11 showed that actually had been quite a decline across the breeding range. In fact, 48% range contraction since the 1970s. And if you have a look on this map, you'll see the black downward pointing triangles, and these are all the areas of loss. And the pinky areas are places where they've remained stable throughout, and you have to look pretty hard to see any upward triangles in orange, which show expansion. So it's a pretty rare breeding bird. You can see a very large range here. As I say, it's very poorly studied breeding species. So somewhere between 610 and maybe 2,000 breeding pairs, but probably much likely to be towards that lower end. So it's a really good species to try and learn a bit more about, particularly its habitat use during the breeding season, habitat use at other times of year, and perhaps the wider scale movements that short-eared owls might make. So the fieldwork started off in 2017, again focused on sort of finding nests and pinpointing territories, and catching, in this case, a female bird, which was sort of bred in this area successfully, sort of May to June time, and made some exploratory movements just after breeding, headed north a little bit, sort of generally blogged around, quite big movements as well over just a few days, heading south and then returning north back to around the breeding area. And you can see just the satellite picking up the movements. So I should add that these are fitted with satellite tags like the cuckoo actually. So they really rely on the solar power, the sun, to power the battery. And if you know a little bit about shorted owls, you know that in the daytime they're probably sat down, roosting in the shade on the ground, perhaps covered by bracken. So there's a period over the winter when the battery isn't charging very well. And you can go for a period of just not knowing where the bird is. So this bird here, 24th of October, was sort of heading westwards. And we lost that bird then over winter. We don't know what happened to it, where it went, because the battery didn't have enough charge. But the next spring, she popped up back around the breeding area and spent some time there, February, March, made a exploratory visit, way to the north in northeast Scotland for a few days, perhaps checking out if there's, better breeding habitat somewhere else, but decided actually go back to where she knows best, and actually spent more time there, and then eventually settled down to breed again, yes, back in the similar area to the previous year. And she raised a brood. And what we're starting to learn from the shorted owl work is that the females, after the eggs hatch and there's young in the nest, they actually leave it to the male to get on with it. And in this case, the female headed northeast up to Aberdeenshire in the middle of May, and made this extraordinary crossing into Norway. And judging by her movements, it looks like she had another breeding attempt in Norway in that same season. In fact, one of our colleagues was in Norway and was able to go and sort of check out the habitat. Didn't see the bird, but confirmed it was suitable breeding habitat. And given, as I say, given the movements, almost certainly bred there again for the second time. So yeah, we heard the bird was there till September, and then picked up again later in that autumn in the west coast, well, towards Western Ireland. And then some movements around the west coast of Ireland. There you go, just incredible, just the way they're moving around. And then a bit of time with no transmission, but then popped up in Dartmoor actually in the spring, and seemed to stay around there for quite a long time. And it makes you wonder whether, she thought about nesting there, but actually she had other thoughts and moved to an area just outside Peterborough. I don't know if you've ever been on the train to Peterborough, and if you're coming in from the south, there's some brick pits there, and it looks a reasonable area. And she stayed there for 25 days actually, and we thought perhaps she's really going to nest here. And we were able to contact the Peterborough Bird Club, who got some birders watchers out there to have a look for her, and they spotted her. And you can just see the tag and confirmed she was alive and well. But obviously not too keen on Peterborough, and she moved on up towards the Norfolk coast on the 26th of April, and then made that fateful journey, obviously heading back towards Norway, where she encountered really strong headwinds, and that's the last that we heard of that bird. So almost certainly sort of perished in the sea. So quite a sad end actually, but really learned a lot from this bird, because we know that she had nest sites in Scotland, and she almost certainly bred in Norway in that same year. But judging by the movements, she spent time in other patches for quite a while, which means that could have possibly bred in these other patches too. So they're really fascinating individual. So pulling this information together, we're starting to learn more about the short-term explorations from home in these home ranges. So you can see it's covering a good chunk of Scotland here in some of those movements. And then outside of a breeding season, really moving around Britain and Ireland. In fact, you can see the bird there down to the southwest, then across to Ireland, up into Northern Ireland. And there's a sort of orangey coloured track that goes down to around Great Yarmouth, actually, then up to sort of Hunstanton Way, before ending up around Wormwood Scrubs, in fact, David Lindo's patch, spending some time there. And putting this together, we start to see that some of these short-eared owls are making really remarkable long-distance migrations. In fact, we've now had 3 birds go to Africa for the winter. I mean, if you look at that blue track, headed way east before deciding to turn southwards and going into Africa. Unfortunately, all 3 birds here perished. I think, well, what incredible movements. I don't know about you, but as a bird watcher, I never expected short-eared owls to be doing this kind of thing. So yeah, that's pulling together what we know. We've just started doing some work on Iceland with some colleagues there just to learn about what the short-eared owls are doing there. But just focusing on that track that's that yellowy track that goes well east into Russia. I think this is a truly remarkable bird that was actually tagged as her nest on the Isle of Arran in June 2020. And then she spent the winter in the south of England. And then during April and May, she travelled to Bachora Delta in northern Russia, which conjures up amazing images for me. I've never been, but I can always want to imagine what it might be like. And judging by the behaviour from the tracking, she nested there, which is over 3,000 kilometres from the site she nested in the previous summer, which I think is really, truly remarkable. We're also starting to learn a bit about the home ranges, and this is on Arran actually, and you can see these territories are quite close to each other. And maybe actually this is why some of the birds move out and make those longer distance movements, because perhaps they're through competition being forced to find new places. But one of these birds here that crosses the sea from Arran made 47 movements back and forth, obviously just finding good foraging areas elsewhere. So we're starting to learn quite a lot about short-eared owls, linking the distribution perhaps limited by abundance of prey. And the home range is actually around 200 hectares in the breeding season. And I find this quite fascinating that their range in the day and night differs. And we're finding that in the daytime, they hunt in the sort of on the lower grounds, but in night, actually, they're spending more time up the mountains. And this might be partly because perhaps in the daytime, golden eagles in parts of the range might be hunting those higher grounds. So the short-eared owls keep out of their way and stick to the lower ground. But at night, when the eagles are roosting, they go up the hills and mountains foraging. We're learning that the females can leave the young before they become fully independent and go on to make sequential breeding attempts, which could be very far away, indeed, at other countries. And that individuals can make really markedly different movements between individuals and between the different seasons. But it does appear that after breeding and during long distance migration that their survival and so hence mortality, survival's low and mortality is high there. So that's the short-eared owl work. You can see more about that on the website. I think it's ongoing work and really fascinating to me. I've also got quite an attachment to this project, the Arctic Skewer project, because this is a project that I had an idea that would be really good to study Arctic skewers and learn a little bit more about them, because it's really rapidly declining breeding species. Populations declined by 81% since 1986. And it's red listed species. It's a priority species for biodiversity action plans. And it's a really good indicator of the health of the wider marine environment. So we were able to, through an appeal, actually raise funds for this project, and able to send my colleagues, John Calladine from Scotland, Sarah Harris, to Fair Isle to do some field work. So we used 2 different types of tag here: the geolocator, which fitted to the bird. You can see it on the right-hand leg of this Arctic skewer. It's attached to a colour ring, and it stays on the bird year-round until it's recaught. And we also used GPS tags to give us information about movements during the breeding season. And we were able to retrieve the information this time, actually not by catching the birds, but if you have a look at that little picture top right, you can see that there's a base station attached to a pole and a laptop. So we could move that base station around and hope that the skewer flies past, and as it flies past, it downloads the data to it. And then John or Sarah could take the laptop and download the information to the computer. So they undertook some fieldwork on Fair Isle in 2017, and they were able to tag 9 birds. And this is just showing that during the incubation period, the distances moved on foraging trips. The white area is where the bird sort of slowed down in its movement and was obviously spending time actually feeding or on a nest site. And you can see here that the maximum trip during this incubation period was 212 kilometres. But for fail nesters, they were making much more longer trips in trying to find food. In fact, one of the birds came down to pretty much opposite Yorkshire, in fact, a 585 kilometre trip, just during that incubation period. So yeah, the birds are obviously spending a long time away from the nest, presumably struggling to find food for the chicks. So as I say, these are all birds from whose nests failed during that season. So yeah, finding food was obviously quite a problem. And in that year, 2017, there was only one successful nest, in fact, and that bird was able to, during the chick-weaning stage, make quite short trips. So don't know how they managed it, but just able to find enough food to be successful. And the next year we did some work for 2 amazing volunteers who have been studying Arctic skewers on Rousey, which is on Orkney, and we teamed up with them to fit some tags the next year. And this was really revealing because on the right, or in the yellow dots of the Fair Isle birds and the white dots of the Rousey birds, and what it really showed is that the birds from Rousey, which were much more successful in their nesting, were actually making much shorter trips, staying closer to the colony. And those Fair Isle birds were having to travel much greater distances foraging. And the interesting thing is actually their foraging rarely overlapped as well. So lots of information here to help explain why breeding success might be higher on Orkney than on Fair Isle. But we're also able to learn something for the first time about where our Arctic skewers go for the winter. So we fitted the tags, and this is in 2017. And the next year in 2018, 8 of the 9 birds returned. So again, site faithful species, and it was great they returned. And we were able to retrieve 4 tags, but actually incredibly difficult birds to catch, and even harder to retrap. They're very, very clever. But the GLS data is already showing us, really fantastic new information. There's still quite a lot of work to do here to actually refine these maps. So we can see here, this is during the breeding season, birds around obviously the breeding area. And then they started their migration. I don't suppose they did really cross sort of Eastern Europe. This is just where the data is not that accurate. But it clearly shows that they spent the main winter period from October to March off the end of South Africa, and then returned back to sort of British waters and Biscay in early to late April before returning to Fair Isle. And one of the other birds didn't go quite so far, spending time in Biscay, August to end of September, and then wintered off West Africa before returning back in the spring, spending some time out in the ocean. And this bird did something completely different again. So movements headed south. In fact, Spent some time in September off the east side of South America before crossing to waters off South Africa, and then back northwards in the spring. So that's 3 birds and 3 completely different migration strategies. So a huge amount to learn about these species. So I'm just going to sort of finish for the last sort of 5-10 minutes, just giving you a flavour of some other work that's it's not just BTO that have been doing work on tagging birds. It's lots of universities and RSPB doing fantastic work looking at migration, but also really getting a handle on how birds are using the areas around their breeding grounds. Lots of really great work by RSPB on seabirds, for example. But this one captures my imagination. It's a redneck phalarope. And there's some work undertaken in Shetland in the summer of 2012. And again, quite a tricky bird to catch. We really had no idea where redneck phalaropes might go. We know actually there's a lot that winter sort of in the Middle East, but this one actually did a remarkable thing. It left Shetland on the 1st of August and then was off eastern Canada 6 days later, and actually wintered off Peru, which is 16,000 miles. So they're tiny little birds. If you get a chance to see a redneck phalarope, they're really amazing species, sort of spinning around and breeding up in Shetland and the high Arctic, but making this incredible journey in the winter. And that was written up in IBIS by RSPB staff. RSPB have also led on other work on, for example, on sort of wood warblers and pie flycatchers here. And this is a bird that was tagged in Devon and winters in Liberia or Southeast Guinea. So a lot of this work now, we undertake in the UK is in collaboration with other organisations and institutions across Europe. So they're real a collaborative field to understanding more about migration of our birds. So some of the sort of recent work that BTO has been doing, one of my colleagues, Ros Green, is just starting a PhD on shelduck. We know that shelduck can undertake a molt migration, sort of heading out across the North Sea towards the Netherlands and Germany. We know that from ringing recovery, it's been sort of well demonstrated, but what we don't really know is whether all our shelduck do that. We've got lots of counts from our Webb's counts, of course, and we can start to build a picture, but Ros is particularly interested in movements of shelduck in relation to the sort of growing number of offshore wind farms, particularly off the East Coast, and how this might impact on the migration of the shelduck. So she did some pilot work a couple of years ago, as I say, building on sort of knowledge from what we know from ringing recoveries. And she tagged 4 birds in Orford Ness in Suffolk, and this just shows the movements before they, well, of course, we don't know whether they were going to do anything in the first place or just hang around Orford Ness all summer and do their molt there, but actually they moved around. And we can see that actually all 4 birds here did actually cross the North Sea. The areas, the shapes on the North Sea are sort of either operational or under construction wind farms. So she's looking to see how the routes they travel and how long they spend in the sort of area where they're going to undertake their molt. And she's found already that they adjust their flight height, so they actually fly higher near the coast in the UK and the Netherlands, and then drop lower over the sea as taking the main part of their migration. So we've got some times here on how long it takes to cross the North Sea, sort of somewhere between sort of 3 to 4 hours. And once they're sort of in the areas of their migration, we get some information on whether they're sticking around in the same place or making movements. This is around the Wadden Sea, so we got birds which have been quite site faithful to patches for quite an area. But then we have this bird, shelduck number 7, which really couldn't make its mind up where it wanted to be, and sort of moved between the Dutch Wadden Sea and the German Wadden Sea backwards and forwards, and between the end of July and the middle of August. So Ros, as I say, is following this pilot work, is just actually starting her PhD this year. So we should have lots more to learn about shelduck, and perhaps that's another talk sometime from Ros. So just to sort of end the tracking bit, work we've been doing this year has been focused on catching passerines. Actually, birds often talked about so far are quite big birds that can take the sort of bigger tags and satellite tags, but we know so little still about our smaller passerines. So this year, my colleagues and volunteers, many volunteers have really helped with this project, have been putting these tiny geolocators, 0.4 grams, onto a range of summer visitors: willow warbler, wood warbler, garden warbler, tree pipit, windchat, and spotted flycatcher up in Scotland, and also in Sherwood Forest, 21 garden warblers were caught. So the big task for next year is to go back to all those places and try to retrieve as many tags as possible, and also deploy probably perhaps another sort of 20 to 30 tags next season as well. So lots to learn about those species, and that's hopefully we can update you on that another time. But I just wanted to spend the last couple of minutes talking about the way you as bird watchers can really make a big difference to what we know about timing of migration, and perhaps a bit about migration routes by contributing your bird watching sightings. So when you're out and about doing your bird watching, making a note of what you see and hear and submitting those records. So BTO, as you know, runs Bird Track. It's a website or a mobile phone app where you can enter your records from your bird watching. And every night, records, probably as we speak, actually, I'm sat in the nunnery now, it's probably happening right this minute, that the records from Bird Track feed nightly through to the Eurobird portal, which is a website, a portal which is run by the European Bird Census Council. And you can see it's a very big collaborative project of all these different portals. And there's many across Europe. There are lots of different kind of bird tracks. So there's ornitho and tractellin and all sorts of things in these different countries. And all the bird watchers across Europe are collecting their information day by day, and it's feeding through to the Eurobird portal at night. So there's about 29 countries taking part at the moment, producing a huge amount of data, 40 million records a year, 100,000 observers across Europe submitting records. We're able to get some information for around about 100 species so far, but that number's continuing to increase. And we're really learning about, as I say, phenology of birds, timing of migration, and where birds are at different times of year. So I just thought I'd share a couple of maps with you. I'm sure Mark especially knows sort of East Coast birders will have been feeling quite deprived in recent weeks. So we've not had many easterly winds. It's been really thin on the ground for sort of bramblings and fieldfares and redwings. So this is a map showing on the left-hand side the 1st to 7th of October. So this is last week. Then on the right, it's the same week, 1st to 7th of October for the year before. So it just shows that, this year has been really lean for those birds coming from Scandinavia compared with the same week the previous year. So if you look down the East Coast, you can see there's actually not many pink dots on the left-hand map compared to what we might normally expect. But that has all changed. We've had some easterly winds. And I'll show you in a minute for the situation for redwing. But I was just wondering if you're thinking, where the waxwings might be, or if they're going to come at any point, then I wouldn't hold your breath quite yet, because the waxwings are still firmly in Sweden. But this is a place that you can go and check out the Eurobird portal on a daily basis if you want to see if birds are starting to make a move. So as I mentioned, it's been thin on the ground for redwing, and this is that same sort of map. This is for last week. Not so many records in Britain compared with the same week the previous year. But those easterly winds did eventually arrive just a few days back. And if you've been out at night listening to the migrating redwings or or during the day. They've really been piling in the last few days. And this is for the week 8th to the 14th. So this last week so you can see the red wings have really truly arrived across Britain, and also heading down across the Low Countries and France, and just into Spain as well. So I think it's a really fascinating use of our bird watching records. As I say, it's live. You can look tomorrow to see what we recorded today, and it's helps us really understand where birds are at different times of year. And there's lots of applications for this, and one sort of current application is in relation to bird flu, actually. So if there's an outbreak of bird flu, we've got real-time data telling us what species are where and what might be likely carriers or impacts on other species. So that's an area of work that the EBCC are really interested in and developing at the moment. So yeah, keep bird watching, keep your records flowing, and you can all contribute to our knowledge of understanding more about migrants and migrant birds. So I'm just going to end there, and obviously I'm happy to help answer any questions if you've got any.
Wonderful, thank you, Dawn.
Okay.
Unshare your screen.
Sure, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, that was completely wonderful. Mind completely blown. I mean, as if obviously nightjars and cuckoos are wonderful enough. Short-eared owls, oh my God.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing, aren't they?
I mean, you referred to the sort of the magic of a short-eared owl or a long-eared owl approaching in off the sea during the sea watch, kind of lolloping clumsily low over the waves in an October or November sea watch. And that in itself is one of, for me, one of the absolute standout highlights of any autumn. But I was just thinking while you were talking about those movements, like we refer to them, or at least I refer to them kind of naively as, oh, they're Scandinavian birds. Here comes a Scandinavian bird. Here they come. And yet, looking and enjoying, what you just kind of illustrated with those movements, they don't belong specifically anywhere. They're complete kind of European or beyond that, Russian, all the rest of it. It's like, there's nowhere they come from, is there? It's like they're roving birds, truly kind of global citizens, if you like. And yeah, that's just endlessly fascinating. I could rabbit on for ages. There are a couple of questions, however. We've got a question from Adam. Good evening, Adam. Adam says, fascinating stuff, Dawn. Many thanks. What is your thinking on the huge difference in the cuckoo survival on the southwest and southeast routes from the UK? Southwest is a shorter sea crossing and less shooting pressure than Italy, ?
Yeah, it seems that, pardon me, the birds going that southeast route are spending a lot of time around the Po Delta, which is presumably a really good stopover site. And maybe, the quality of that stopover site, they're really managing to refuel and get in really good body condition before making that crossing. This is one idea, that maybe the birds going through France and Spain, maybe the quality of the stopover site isn't good. So as they head onto their migration, they're perhaps in less good condition. Right. Is one idea.
It's really completely fascinating, that, isn't it? Such a huge contrast of fortunes between,
Yeah, and that's why it's important, people might say, oh, you've done cuckoos, why keep doing cuckoos? Because I think, you need, it's still a very small sample size, sort of 5 or 6 birds at the time. We're now into sort of the 40s, and we're getting, obviously not all of them even make it that far, and some died before, but you need that sample size to really start to understand what is happening, rather than just that small number.
No, absolutely. Another question from Jenny Davis. Good evening, Jenny. She says, thanks so much for the inspiring talk, Dawn. After watching David LaPuma's talk earlier in the week, how do you see the recent advancements in technology affecting your research over the coming years?
Well, yeah, I think sort of just illustrated by the work that my colleagues have been doing this year on the smaller passerines, the willow warblers. We're going to start to learn more about those smaller species where it's not really been possible to fit tags. In fact, even the cuckoos at the moment, we're still only tagging male cuckoos. We're just waiting for, it will happen, the weight to come down on the tags, that we can fit smaller birds. So I think as technology improves, we're going to be able to fit tags for a much wider range of species. And the challenge for a lot of the birds, especially the little geolocator tags, is always going to be recatching the birds to get the data back. So it would, people often ask, why can't you have a little tiny tag where there's no need to recatch the bird? A bit like the Arctic skewers, where you can have that base station scenario and you just sort of retrieve it when you're near it somehow. And I'm sure it'll come, just not quite there yet.
Yeah. Talking of which, we just got another question from Rhesus Monkey. So it's nice to have non-humans watching. Welcome. He or she says, thanks for the talk. How do you catch an Arctic skewer?
We use a walking trap at the nest site. So as I say, they're very clever birds. They know when something is not quite right.
Yeah.
But the first time you catch them, they're not, they're clever, but they will walk into it and get caught.
Right.
But the next year, when you're trying to catch them again, you use the same technique, the trap near the nest site. They think, hey up. I seem to remember this from last year, and are much more cagey in going in. So yeah, even though the birds returned in good numbers, so which is really encouraging when you obviously the safety of the bird is always first. You're always thinking about the welfare, that fitting tags isn't going to impact the birds.
Yeah, of course.
At all. So it's great that the return rate was really high, but just unable to catch all the birds that returned. Although I should say, in the following year, actually, the Fair Isle Bird Ob staff managed to catch one of the others.
Nice. By the same technique? Or?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, the skewer stuff as well. Wow, just wonderful and so such different areas. Again, the assumption would be, they all go to one general area, and all three birds went to completely different wintering areas, didn't they?
Yeah, I think it's nice that the tagging, deploying tags in different ways, not only tells us about the migration routes, but it gives a real insight to why these birds might be declining. Part of it could be about their wintering areas, but it also could be, as we've seen, perhaps some challenges around finding food from the different colonies.
Do you think that's why it is from an Arctic skewer perspective?
I think that's going to be a pretty important factor.
Yeah.
Food. I mean, the Fair Isle staff, obviously on the bird observatory, were able to they monitor Arctic skewers, and that one year, 2017, was particularly poor, just one successful nest. But they have had better success in other years, but still not amazing. So productivity is low. It's
really interesting how that appears to be mirrored. I mean, anecdotally or a bit more substantially in migration records too. Obviously, that's from a wider range of Arctic skewer, but doing the sort of skewer sections for the Yorkshire Bird Report over some years now, the decline in numbers of Arctic skewers actually observed, along the east coast of Yorkshire. It's been a steady and drastic decline in numbers of Arctic skewers, and yet a kind of minor increase in pomerine skewers as well. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. Who knows how that will pan out in the future? But certainly Arctic skewers are just nothing like as common as they were certainly when I was younger. But looking at those, the distribution, how that correlates with the success on the Fair Isle birds and the Orkney birds staying closer to home. Why were they more successful, do you think?
Well, I guess they're able to find food closer to home, so they're probably not leaving the chicks or indeed the eggs and the chicks alone for very long. We definitely, I think, saw cases in Fair Isle. We saw an Arctic skewer eat its own, I think it was an egg at one point. So yeah, and it also exposes the nest potentially to other predators. Great skewers on the islands might jump in if the birds are away so long foraging. It opens up to the nest to predation.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, just to finish on, I think a really important, wonderful message, towards the end of your talk, which actually permeated the whole talk, was the importance of citizen science, or as we mentioned, purposeful bird watching, as the great Mr. Ian Wallace once called it. And it seems to me, to state the obvious, that really technology has completely revolutionized bird recording in the last 5 or 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really has. So, the tagging work, it's absolutely brilliant, but it's expensive. So we're still going to always, ringing traditional with metal rings, as you guys do at the bird obs, is still really important. We learn so much besides migration. Actually, I think that's really important to stress that the metal ringing of birds gives us so much information about survival, and that's something we don't get in any other way. So that the ringing scheme contributes huge knowledge around survival and productivity of birds, and what we're learning from the technology side of it. Is really fascinating and just groundbreaking. But those tags, the cuckoo tags, the owl tags, they're sort of £3,000 per tag, plus sort of download, extra cost for downloads, and the other little tags sort of range between sort of 100 and sort of 300 tags. So it's really quite expensive work, but hopefully it does show that it's really revolutionised our knowledge about sort of local movements and migration. But as you say, for bird recording, many of us are now using apps to record, or be it a phone app or entering records into a website, spreadsheet, whatever, making the data much more accessible in real time. I think that's a really exciting thing about actually the Eurobird portal. Is your records you enter today are in a European system tonight, and tomorrow morning they're displayed on a map for anybody across the world to see.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, isn't it? And a perfect place to end. I mean, a really positive development. A really kind of something we can actually kind of all be proud of and look at contributing to, and which will actively contribute to to conservation, ideally, of the species involved. So yes, Dawn, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. I could rabbit on and talk to you all night about this stuff. Endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us and giving your time and your skills completely for free. It's really good of you. We appreciate it greatly. We've had many messages of thanks, and people have clearly massively enjoyed the talk. So thanks again for joining us. It's really been great. Just to wrap up, folks, to say for the coming days, same old stuff, basically. We've got loads going on, happy to say. Guided walks. Check the programme for details. That's on the Flamborough Bird Observatory website. So flamboroughbirdobs.org.uk for the programme. Everything's free, and everybody's welcome to everything, of course. If you do feel like throwing some brass in the metaphorical bucket, we are accepting that at justgiving.com/Migweek21, and all the money goes to St. Catherine's Hospice, and we'll be really chuffed. If you can spare a few quid, that would be really great. Tomorrow night is our final talk of the week, our 5th and final talk of the week from Poppy Rummery, and that'll be a year at Bempton Cliffs. So keeping it local tomorrow night. But thanks again, Dawn, for joining us. That was really fantastic. And thanks for joining us, everyone. And we'll see you again tomorrow night. Cheers.